Welcome back to One Winning Pod, where the votes are in and the people have spoken on who they wanted the late round bracket winner to be. But before we discuss that, guys, how'd you feel about the bracket, or the chart as we like to call it? And how are you feeling about it?
Feeling better about it than my NCAA March Madness bracket, that I can say for sure. But surprised with who the overall winner was. I definitely thought that the matchup on the opposite side of the chart that this guy emerged from was going to be was really the real championship of the bracket. But the people made it interesting, made it a very tight race, and I get the argument. I do. I still would have gone with someone else, but I think that this is still someone you could say is the greatest player the Ravens have drafted between rounds 5 and 7 in franchise history. So it was a fun little exercise.
I just can't believe the guy who inspired me to come up with this idea, he got knocked out in the first round. Chuck Clark. Couldn't beat. How did he get up against McPhee, man? But yeah, no, I kind of with Peter, man. Sam Cook, I mean, good choice, but man, I thought the outside linebackers on the other side definitely had a chance. But yeah, I mean, lots of good names. It was kind of fun to go through it with people. Glad we got a lot of participation. That was nice. But yeah, I just feel, I feel like I let my boy Chuck Clark down, I feel like we let him down twice. First the trade and then the bracket, Feels bad.
Chris, you didn't go campaigning for him on Twitter. I saw no canvassing, You got to get people to turn out to vote that you thought were Chuck Clark sympathizers.
I know. I've given up on Twitter, but I'm on there very rarely now. Ever since the incident,
I feel you.
But yeah, no, you're right. No, it's all my fault. So,
well, I think I was actually most proud of this bracket was our intuition on the play-ins was, I think, really good. We were having a lot of trouble figuring out who these last seeds should be, and we then decided to do a play-in, and except for one, Broderick Washington versus Arthur Jones, which was a blowout. All of them were within a vote or two. You could have maybe called for a recount, and it would have changed. If we tweeted it out a different day, kind of thing. So it was definitely pretty tight. We actually had to have the Nick Boyle Bradley Bozeman one. It was tied for a long, long time, just going back and forth, and we kind of juiced it up at the end. They got the most votes because we were like, hey, this one's this one's tied. You want to be the deciding factor. So I thought that was a fun one, and I was glad that we did it that way in retrospect.
Yeah, definitely added some intrigue early on, because unlike basketball where you have an actual play out happening, there's going to be a lot of uniformity over what people are going to pick, I feel. Even with that, we did have a couple upsets, which we'll talk about. But yeah, definitely got the bracket out, I think, on the right foot. Got intrigue right off the bat with some intriguing matchups. So, yeah, that was fun. And, we'll probably talk about it too, but even though Art Jones did get blown out, he was, I think, the last guy that we were debating putting in this bracket. There's still some other guys who were left off that you could make the argument, hey, they're in the discussion as great picks from, that time, those rounds, but it's just that the Ravens have drafted so many great ones. You're like, they're definitely a step or two below these guys, and everyone's going to be like, oh, yeah, no question, those picks were better, but those were still good picks. So, fun trip down memory lane of how the Ravens have been able to strike a lot of gold at this point, and give us a little bit of hope. Since we don't have many draft picks this year, but we do have a 5th and a 6th rounder, and hopefully they can be players that will rival the guys on this list that would show up in a future bracket that we would do in the future. Maybe bump out Art Jones, and maybe any late 4th round wide receiver or late round wide receiver could get turned into an actual name than just a clump of them.
I was amused by the fact that if you look at the rounds these guys were drafted in, only Geno Stone was drafted in the 7th round. All the rest were 5 and 6. It's actually basically evenly distributed, which I thought was another kind of interesting little factoid of creating the setup. But honestly, there was zero correlation with the round drafted and their results, which also kind of makes sense. So our winner was actually a 6th round pick, and so was the runner up, and yeah, so it was pretty cool. I was surprised to see Waller fall in the first round. That was the surprise upset for me. I was also surprised that Tony Pashas got zero love. The only person, fun fact, Peter noticed, like the only person who didn't get a pick at all in this draft, Deshaun Elliott barely got one in that next round. But yeah, definitely poor Pashas.
I mean, I think people forget that he was a longtime starter in the league after his time in Baltimore. You know, he bounced around to a couple places, at least San Francisco, maybe it was Cleveland, the other spot. But, I mean, he carved out a solid 10, 11-ish year-long career for himself as a late-round pick, solid guy. But he's a lineman, so I think, and his time in Baltimore wasn't terribly long when you compare it to other late-round picks. So I could certainly see that being a reason that he kind of got bumped down a bit. It might not be fresh in people's memories, but once again, you know, just showing once again, the Ravens have a really good track record here. You know, just because someone didn't get a lot of votes doesn't mean that fan base isn't appreciative of him. It's just that guy was just even better.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a little bit of recency bias in here too. I think, I mean, I feel like Sam Cook, well, I guess maybe Dallas Thomas, but I feel like a lot of the, the late round early guys kind of fell off pretty early. But, hey, it's the way it is. We know our audience. We we know it's bound to happen, so it's all good. But yeah, it's kind of fun to, like we did with the undrafted bracket a couple of years ago, just to kind of look at,
that's
look
next year's
back and
bracket.
hopefully have some discussion. yeah.
That's next year's bracket. Don't spoil so soon.
Yeah, people will forget.
Yeah, that's right. But I don't know. I guess the only other thing that was kind of surprising, we kind of alluded to it, we had the Matt Judon and Adalius Thomas lineup in the elite or the Final Four, and I thought Matt Judon was going to win, even though I voted for Adalius Thomas. I thought Matt Judon was going to win for the recency bias part, and then once Adalius Thomas made that, I thought he had it in the bag because he established himself in that round. But no, then I was surprised even further, and Sam Cook won. So that was it was only by one vote for what it's worth, but yeah, I mean it was still close.
It's really interesting, and I'm interested to know what the majority of people filling out the bracket, how they made their picks, because we discussed this in the seeding. Like, do we seed these guys by how they were as their career as Ravens or their career as a whole? And if you look at that, particularly the 1-4 matchup, Darren Waller ranked 1 because even though, he didn't realize his full potential in Baltimore, obviously after he went to then Oakland, now Vegas, he turned into a Pro Bowl talent. Thankfully, he got the help that he needed and just was able to just continue to be a star in this league, and hopefully he can continue that with the Giants now that he's been traded there. That being said, though, you could still make the argument. I mean, Nick Boyle obviously has been such a force as a blocker during his career. Unfortunately, the injury sapped him of being able to carry around some of that strength that he was able to do, but he was just a monster in that position. Certainly, below average as a receiving talent, but when you're looking at him as a blocking tight end, you want to compare that to where Boyle is among tight ends in the NFL during his prime as far as blocking, and compare that to where Darren Waller is at receiving. They're both comparable. I think it would rank definitely top 5, maybe top 3 in both those categories. So, yeah, that one was interesting. I think it would be interesting to know what people were thinking there. Were you doing it more as what their time as the Ravens were, or were you actually looking at it as like both these guys' career and weighing Boyle's blocking ability as more impressive as what Waller has done as a receiver? And then I think along those lines, I guess, so we have our Final Four, and I think our Final Four is really fair. However you wanted to seed this, like Judon, Thomas, McPhee, Cook, all excellent finds between rounds 5 and 7. So let's say this is it. These are we're saying that this is the pool, the 4 players we're going to pick from as the best pick. Of these guys, which do you guys would you pick as a number 1? I definitely have a number 1 pick. I was curious if you guys were able to narrow down one guy from that list.
It's really tough.
It's tough.
I guess my initial reaction is probably that the Sam Cook being the winner is probably where I would go. In terms of, I think he wins it both from longevity. He's played the most games ever as a Raven. So he clearly has that. in the bag. But also I guess he never kind of achieved. Well, I don't know if he's kind of achieved the Hall of Fame level status of a punter, but I think for the last 6 or 7 years, I think around the league, I think Cook was kind of known as one of the elite punters. Maybe not the last couple of years. I think with some other guys sort of having better stats in terms of net yardage and stuff like that. But Cook was still kind of revolutionized the position a little bit. It's the one that I think who did the punters are people too, and he had that article from ESPN that was he's invented all these types of kicks and stuff. So he's almost a little bit like Yanda in that you have the longevity and you have just the respect of your peers kind of thing. I look at McPhee and I'm like, McPhee was good. He kind of dropped off for a little bit when he went to the Bears. Came back and obviously a good player, but not the same level. Judon, I think, has an opportunity to get there if he continues his career in New England. I think overall, he might make it. Adelius Thomas is so interesting though, because I remember of him a little bit. And I know that he was definitely one of the elite players kind of in those early mid-2000 defenses, and he played fairly well in New England as well, but to me it kind of ended up almost in the Hall of Very Good, which is kind of where Cook is. So I can he might be my other choice, but I do feel like Cook just has the longevity. I would just give it to him over that.
This was my final four when I did my independent bracket, and I had Adelius Thomas winning, but honestly, I've been somewhat convinced as well. I can see why Sam won, and I'm happy to let Sam be the winner, and maybe even have my mind changed, because I feel like Adelius kind of fell off after he left the Ravens. He just wasn't quite the same. Whereas you discussed, Sam Cook had so many years of excellence. So I don't know. What did you think, Peter? Because we discussed in our private channel, we thought there would be a runaway winner, and then we were surprised it was close. So and then I was maybe two people thought there was a runaway winner and they were different, and that's why it got so close. I thought it was going to be Adelius, but then I guess not.
Yeah, I too thought that when it came down to it, it was going to be Adelius. And I guess it's interesting because obviously who was voting in this? Well, people who listen to this pod and who follow our Twitter. And I think that if you're part of this audience for as long as you've been, you probably have a slightly different view of the Ravens than the general, stereotypical Ravens Twitter verse, which I feel like if we opened it up to all Ravens Twitter, there's no way that Sam Cook, a punter, would win this. But I think fans appreciate, and the Ravens have done a good job of this over the past decade of people really coming to appreciate minutiae of football that maybe other franchises don't put as much emphasis on. For better or for worse, I'm sure we could have a very spirited conversation as to whether or not the Ravens put too much of an emphasis on blocking tight ends and specialty punters. But yeah, I think that, like Chris said, the NFL Network story and the ESPN story that really showcased how Cook had transformed the game explains a big part of how he was able to get to the championship and basically turn the matchup against Adelius Thomas, which I also thought was going to be a landslide in Thomas's favor, into a coin flip. But yeah, I will say Adelius Thomas, great player for the Ravens. He is one of my all-time favorites as far as kind of the tier B Ravens players. I think he was a very good player, but he wasn't in the vein of Ray Lewis and McAllister and Boulware from that era. Certainly a tier below that. But excellent player. He did take a slight dip in play in New England, but I think he was still a very good player there. Got to give credit to the guy for standing up to Belichick. If you guys remember, his time in New England kind of waned, where basically him and Belichick got into a little bit of a standoff over Adelius Thomas being late for a practice where it was just snowing in Boston, so there was traffic, and he called the organization and said, "Hey, I'm stuck in traffic, so I'm going to be late." And Belichick was just when he got to the training facility, just sent him home. And Adelius Thomas is talking with reporters the next week, being like, "Man, I'm a grown man. I told this organization I was going to be late because there was snow. I'm not don't have that flying car from the Jetsons, so I don't know what they wanted me to do. It's a little quote from him. He said, I don't have the flying car from the Jetsons. So, I mean, props to him for standing up to Belichick's BS. I think we can all appreciate that. I do have to give it to Judon. I think Judon is the absolute clear-cut favorite here. Should have been the winner. The guy came in, and from day one, which you can't say for almost everyone in this list. Almost everyone here in this list, it took him a few seasons to establish themselves. Heck, I was re-listening to Sam Cooke's retirement press conference today in preparation for this episode, and he was recanting a story where in his second year, he got called into the office, and they said, "Hey, if you don't pump better, like, we're cutting you, like, after this coming game." And obviously he had a great game because he's had that long tenure with the Ravens. But Judon came out as a huge splash, and it's frustrating that we've seen his best self since he left Baltimore. Generally with Ravens defensive players who were later round selections, that isn't the case, but Judon upped his game from being a very good player to a defensive MVP caliber player with New England the past few seasons. So when we're looking at their career as a whole, I think Judon is the clear-cut answer to the best pick that the Ravens have selected in the late rounds. If we're just going by what they did as a Raven, I do think you have a very tight race here between Cook, Judon, and Thomas, because I think what Thomas and Judon both brought to the defense was very similar. They could rush the passer, but they could do it all. They could pass coverage. Thomas was excellent at special teams. Actually, his first Pro Bowl appearance in 2003, he made it as a special teams player entry, despite the fact that he had 8 sacks on the season on defense. He got voted in as a special teams player. But yeah, all that to say is my personal opinion. I think Judon should have won this bracket, but Thomas and Cook definitely great players in Ravens history as well.
Now to talk about free agency. Ravens are a little bit strapped by the Lamar situation, and they definitely could make moves, but they're trying to let themselves have the opportunity to match any offer sheets that might come in, and I think that's kind of a pain. It's really difficult limbo to be in with Lamar. Hard to improve the team much. So many things they could do if they just knew like he was going to be on the Ravens on the $32 million contract. You could do so much stuff, but because they don't want to start pulling levers and then not be able to match a contract, which I think is completely reasonable and forward thinking, we're kind of stuck here twiddling our thumbs a little bit, but we have been able to keep some of our own. Geno Stone, Nick Moore, Justice Hill, all re-signed with the Ravens. Tavon Mullen agreed to a 1-year deal, and Michael Pierce and Gus Edwards were renegotiated. They also used void years to open up some more cap space. Unfortunately, though, the saddest news of them all was that we cut Calais Campbell. He is still a free agent at the moment. In the release of the news, Acosta said that they're definitely open to bringing him back. I can't help but think, if this Lamar situation was different, we would definitely have kept him. But, we'll see what Calais does. I know he wants to play with a competitor, so I could definitely see him coming back or at least waiting to sign. He doesn't have to rush into anything. But I guess, what are you guys thinking?
Man, I have really had to recalibrate all my thoughts about this Lamar Jackson situation. I feel like for this whole period, I've been definitely among the more confident as far as the situation being wrapped up by the end of the year. That would have been the end of the 2022 NFL calendar year. I figured Lamar was just going to concede after this year and realize, hey, like I bet on myself to have a great year and to lead the team far into the playoffs, which would up my value. But that's obviously not what we've seen here. And something that's really frustrating with this is that we're seeing that possibly, like I said, we're speculating here, but I think it is a very logical conclusion to draw, is that where we are with Lamar is really holding up what the Ravens can do. Now, with that said, you look at the free agents that are out there, it feels to me, and you guys can feel free to disagree, but to me, looking at it, it feels overall like this isn't a year of free agency where there's some giant splashes, right? particularly at wide receiver and cornerback, which are the Ravens' biggest holes at the moment. So, is it killing them that much? Debatable. I don't know. Would Adam Thielen or Jacoby Myers really push the needle of the offense that much? Is missing out on them that big a deal? My initial lean is no. That said, we kind of need someone out there to help out with depth. But yeah, it's interesting. I had overlooked this part of the equation, that this holdout. It's not really a holdout, but Lamar holding out on signing the tender could cause some ripples and kind of put the Ravens in a little bit of sludge at the moment and kicking the wheels. But yeah, well, it's certainly, let's put it this way, it's certainly not something that I look at here and say, like, the Ravens are winning at the moment. If anything, it's a draw.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It's definitely handicapping the team. I can't say that I can't say there are any free agents on the market right now that I'm like, oh, the Ravens should have signed like this person. I think, I kind of agree with you, Peter. Like, a lot of the names out here, just like, okay. It's unfortunate. I think I'm going to call it #SlayWatch. For about like 2 hours, I think it seemed like there was a rumor that the Ravens were interested in signing Darius Slay away from the Eagles, which I would have loved that move. That would have been great. I think overall he had a great season with the Eagles. He's a very good player, very underrated, kind of similar to Marlowe in that respect, for playing for the Lions for a long time. Just never kind of really got that national recognition until he left. But that fell through. The Eagles re-signed him. So I don't know what Marlowe was talking about. But yeah, other than that, like, I think it's fine. I don't know. The Ravens actually have kind of deviated a little bit the last couple of years in signing big free agents near the beginning of free agency. So, I mean, you go back to Earl Thomas, you go to Marcus Williams, and, a couple of those names. So, like, it's not like the Ravens don't do it. It does happen occasionally if they find the player that they really, really like. I mean, I just don't know if I like any of these receivers. Not that much to kind of give up some of this stuff. It is a little frustrating, just like the not having the ability to do things. Like, I feel like I'm not worried now, but if this continues into around training camp, I'm a little bit more worried at that point. I think that's going to definitely hurt the Ravens' ability to be able to pick up guys who are camp cuts, which is one issue, and to be able to make an in-season trade, right? I mean, they have done that for the past couple of seasons, and I think if, assuming like tons of dominoes fall where they do, Lamar doesn't hold out, he plays well, he stays healthy, the team is playing well, and that they just need one more piece to go really far, they could have that ability. But, obviously with the franchise tag and with the cap situation, it just, there's not much you can do. It's a little frustrating. I get both sides of it. I get why Lamar wants to maximize his value. I get from the Ravens' perspective, it's frustrating that you're, being held hostage by a player. But, it kind of is what it is. I think we're all just hoping for some resolution here, one way or the other.
The thing I like to remind myself is that all the levers we're not pulling right now can be pulled next year. So part of me is like, you know what? If we were to do those moves, keep Lamar Jackson, et cetera, that would be almost like an all-in push for this season. So part of me is like, we can wait. And I agree with you, Peter. Like, none of these wide receivers are making me itch to, like, do a simple reconstruction of like, Mark Andrews' deal or whatever, and like open up some cap space, go get this guy, throw some void years on. Like, I mean, screw these wide receivers. Like, honestly, they're just not that interesting to me at all. Like, I'd rather draft two guys, draft a guy, I don't know, pray. Like, I have no interest in any of them at all. Like, I really, really don't. The only one that was like slightly interesting to me, purely as a player, not because of like all the other baggage, would have been Brandon Cooks. I think he would have been a really interesting pick, and for a fifth and a sixth, that's nice. But like the contract was miserable. So I never knew about the Slay news until after the fact. but I would have like called BS on it because I thought it would cost too much money, given like the pickle that the Ravens are in. And yeah, I don't know. It all stinks, but it's not the free agent class to go crazy on for sure. The Ravens are linked to Rock Ya-Sin. He's a pretty decent outside corner, high draft pick, had a productive season last year. I could definitely see them being able to sign him for a reasonable contract, use void years, make him really, really cheap this year. And I anticipate the kind of talk about these void years. The Ravens are doing this with the full intention of fixing it, no matter what happens with Lamar. Right? If you keep Lamar, you're able to fix it. You can pull these things back and not actually have void years. And if they don't, then they'll obviously have a lot more cap room to deal with. So then they can deal with the void years. But I do think it's nice that they're doing that. I think it's really savvy, and I don't have any problem with it. I think it's a really appropriate use of the credit card. It's like my opinion about taking on debt. It's not always the worst thing. This is a smart debt to take on, and it's completely reasonable to adjust it down the line. But I think, Chris, you brought up a good point. I kind of forget about it frequently, that even though I think, like, it's kind of confusing to me, but my understanding is this. The Ravens have to stop negotiating with him on, like, July 17th, and then he's going to play under the tag. However, teams can still trade for him, like, offer him an offer sheet, and we can still match it, like, through, like, week 10, I think, or something, or week something. Like, don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure that's true. So, like, there's, like, this other, like, timeline where some competitor, let's say, like, I mean, it'd be ridiculous, but, like, Kansas City, I doubt they could. But, like, Mahomes goes down for the year, and then they, like, pull the lever to go get Lamar Jackson. That doesn't feel like a real thing. Let's see. Who's another team that could be, like, more interesting?
Lamar lost really bad on that bet if Kansas City trades for him, because there's no way they could pay him with Mahomes' contract. I mean, the Colts are the ones that scare me the most, to be honest. Because, like, where are they in the draft order? There's somewhere they could miss out on a top quarterback, right?
The Colts are number 4
They're
right
like
now.
4, yeah.
Yeah, you could miss out on
Yeah.
They
almost certainly will. Somebody's going to take the 3rd pick from the Cardinals, I think.
Yeah. Young, Stroud, and Richardson could all be gone there, and then that would really scare me right there.
But I think, like, the offer sheet would have to already exist going into draft night. Like, there's no way that this would actually be a concern for the Ravens, right? They can't, like, the picks happen, and then, like, in that 15 minutes, like, they can't offer an offer sheet and, like, all that stuff.
Well, right, sure. But I guess my point is, like, if we're speculating that that's a possibility now, for us who give, like, all of, like, 2 minutes of thought to the Indianapolis Colts on average per week, as non-Colts fans, like, I'm sure their front office has thought of that as a path that they could go by, whether or not they're highly considering it,
The Colts would want to do it immediately after their pick. They would draft the 4th pick.
Which is why I'm saying, like, like they would, they could put found groundwork for that to make it happen, in the days leading up.
Yeah. Yeah, they could. I mean, that would be a definitely difficult spot. But honestly, man, it appears to me with the way, like, the Colts has navigated this so far, Homeboy's ready to match, like, literally anything. like nobody can realistically give him an offer they can't refuse. And I truly think that they're just wanting to be able to pass the blame to somebody else if a fully guaranteed deal is offered and that is signed. I feel like they're actually comfortable probably going that route, but they just don't want to be the ones that have to do it. I mean, at least by how they're posturing themselves. They're definitely posturing themselves for that, to be prepared for anything. But we'll see. I don't think it's going to happen. The owners are meeting in a couple days, I think. And I'm sure it's going to come up.
Oh, I'm sure it has to. I mean, there was that article that the NFLPA put out, and it was like, owners are colluding. This is unacceptable. So, yeah, I mean, once that was kind of out, like, yeah, the response has to come. But yeah.
The collusion part of it is so interesting to me. Like, part of me, it feels like, sure, like, it could be. But also at the same time, it's like, I wonder, does there even need to be collusion? Because everyone knows like, it's kind of unspoken that everyone knows that owners don't want to pay that much to a quarterback, and that someone else getting Watson money would bring the average value up. So it's like, is that collusion? If it's obvious knowledge, I don't know.
I mean, no, that's the argument they'll make, is like, it's not actually collusion. We're just all coming to the same conclusion.
Yeah. I mean, it's weird. Like, I feel like you have to have an established baseline of more than one data point before, like, you have to have, like, we have like one fully guaranteed contract. So Is that an outlier or is that the standard, right? I think it's very clear that, like, from how everyone else is responding to it from the owners, like, that's an outlier. That's not going to happen again. Like, it was a bad trade. It was a bad deal. Like, everything about it was just bad. Yeah, you can't make an outlier the new standard based on that. But the process has got to play out and all that stuff. So
I think, though, while the Ravens are sitting somewhat still, retaining their own as best they can, the rest of the division is making some moves. I think the number one move in the division has to be Orlando Brown Jr. going to the Cincinnati Bengals on a 4-year, $64 million contract. I'm not that scared of him. I'm not too worried. I'm like kind of hyped for Oweh to get the chance to pass rush on him because he's like the exact guy we got from that trade. So it'll make for some good storylines. And yeah, I don't know. Not that excited for them. I feel like OBJ is a very serviceable tackle in this league. He is probably above average, but the average isn't great, and he's certainly not elite.
Yeah, I won't admit that I've watched a ton of Orlando Brown's tape when he went to the Chiefs. Certainly, there have been some clips that have made their way online where he just got completely bull rushed. He wasn't able to keep up with someone's speed. But I haven't watched enough of his tape to say whether or not he's lost a step since he went to Kansas City, left Baltimore. So I see that argument. At the end of the day, though, it is still just one move. I think that it really doesn't do too much or little for the Bengals because they already really have revamped their offensive line big last offseason. Left tackle is the most important position, sure, but I think they did enough to take it away from sandpaper, which is what it was in 2020 when they made the Super Bowl, to pretty decent, which is what it was last year. So, but yeah, that is one thing we can look at as the rest of the division and compare that with what the Ravens have done. It's not like teams have made super big splashes. If Orlando Brown is the one that we're going to say is the biggest splash of any team, by far, the Ravens really haven't been overtaken by anyone else in the division when we're just looking at additions made through free agency, at least at this time.
Yeah, I kind of look at the Browns. I feel like nobody that they kind of signed was really kind of worth it. I know they did end up cutting a couple of people. Josh Johnson, I think, or John Johnson, their safety, ended up cutting him, signed Juan Thornhill for a 3-year deal to replace him. A couple of the other names there, like re-signed a couple of people. Taki was one. Yeah, I don't know. Nothing there kind of really scares me, especially for their team. It was just kind of middling last year. Like, I guess if they get some of their quarterback situation figured out and coaching, like maybe they might do damage, but no big splashes. The Bengals, I think it is important to know that while they signed a couple guys, Orlando Brown, Jermaine Pratt, I think re-signing him, that was a good deal for them. 3 years, $21 million. That's not too bad. I think Pratt's definitely on that solid, like, B-tier linebacker. They did end up losing both their starting safeties, Jesse Bates and Von Bell. So I do think that's going to be pretty significant for them. Their secondary is going to have a lot of changes this year. So for a team that played really well on defense, especially into the playoffs, I'd have to think that would be significant. We'll see what happens when they draft. I'd imagine that probably corner or safety, one of those will be a position. I know they have Dax Hill, but didn't really play too well for them last year. So I don't, who knows if they're still believing him. I don't know. But we would probably have to ask Justin about that in a couple months. But yeah, I think I think that'll be interesting, kind of see what they're doing. The Steelers, I feel like just overall, not a whole lot of names on there, but I feel like a couple of those are some good signings, especially Isaac Sumulo from a guard from the Eagles, kind of helped solidify the offensive line. I think that could be significant. But I mean, yeah, we'll have to see. I think they're definitely trying to kind of fill in some gaps, especially a linebacker too. They've overturned a lot of names there, so I don't know how that experiment's going to work for them. But at least on the offensive line, I think that's a good signing for them.
Well, apparently Jonah Williams has requested a trade, so that's interesting. Like they made their tackles slightly better, but they might lose the other guy who they were hoping to move over to right. You know, like we'll see how it actually plays out for him. But definitely,
these guys they're really, man, they're playing left really matters to them. I don't know. I never played football, so I can't. It seems to me like, you know, it wouldn't be that big a difference. But man, left tackle.
gotta protect that blind side. Make the extra $5 million.
Pretty crazy, right? I mean, I feel like
Do we
remember
the money? I guess. I guess left tackles must make on average a significant amount more. That must be it.
They do, yeah. I mean, but I think it's the competitor aspect of things. Some people are just more natural that way. You know, that's been compared to wiping your butt with a different hand. Like, there's definitely, it's not like you could just change sides willy nilly, but it is relatively, it's a more transferable skill than they might let on.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say though, Orlando Brown, he got less money than Ronnie Stanley did a couple of years ago. So, I mean, did he really get more money holding out for left? I don't know.
Well, I think like he kind of turned down a bigger contract at one point. I don't know about the guarantees and total structure, et cetera, but he definitely had a bigger contract at one point from the Chiefs than he ended up signing. So
yeah,
I don't know. I think he still got the number one like guarantees though, or something.
Lamar liked his contract. We know that much.
Very proud. Patrick Peterson went to the Steelers. Not the player he once was, but still, I think a decent addition for them. The good thing is like the division hasn't looked like they've gotten like scary better. Just a little bit better. They definitely have made bigger moves than we have. There's a lot more millions of dollars being thrown around. Dalvin Tomlinson, 4-year, $57 million contract is a big deal for the Cleveland Browns. We'll see how that impacts their defense. So I don't know. There's just there's a lot of a decent amount of like role players. I feel like not earth shattering, changing their scheme players. Just good role players that could contribute and that they might extract some value out of. Get better play than the contract dictates. But honestly, a lot of these players I feel like are going to play to expectation for the dollars spent. So I'm not that worried. I guess the last bit of news too to discuss is that CoCap is leaving the Ravens to go to Tennessee's coaching staff to be the assistant special teams coach. So, a little bit of a promotion for the guy. We'll definitely miss Levine in Baltimore. He had such a great career and contributed to our scouting team last year. So, wish him the best. Wouldn't be surprised at all if he's a special teams coach in a couple of years' time.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it sucks to lose him from the Ravens organization, particularly to a team that we don't like terribly much, to put it mildly. But yeah, I mean, for his career personally as a coach, I think it's a huge move for him, and wish him a lot of luck. And hopefully, he can become entrenched and be a staying point in this league as a coach. Maybe work his way up to head coach. I could see that with him, But who knows? Good luck to him. And I guess that kind of brings us full circle to the beginning of the episode because, we're talking about former Ravens players who, particularly on special teams, who went into coaching roles. And obviously Cook, maybe people were figuring that into the final equation as well as marking him as the best pick in the 5 to 7 range. He joined the Ravens staff as consultant for helping to coach up our guy with the hair, so.
Do you remember his name?
I do remember his name, but, I was just trying to make it a little more interesting.
The most attractive player on the Ravens roster.
I was feeding the line to Alec. If I just said Jordan Stout, I don't know if he would have gotten that.
Okay. I thought you legitimately forgot for a second. That would have been really funny. The guy with the hair. Yeah.
Guy with the
definitely
hair.
remember him.
I just like the fact that Sam's like hyping up his son. He's usually showing all these like punny videos of his son. He's gonna be like the next coming, you know. It's gonna be awesome.
Hey, maybe he will.
I mean, he looks like he has some nice puns, you know. I was watching it.
The numbers are against him, but he might.
I kind of like, I don't know. Part of me disagrees because I feel like if you had the best punter as your dad, like being able to teach you, like no one can compete with that, you know. As long as you have some,
sure. I mean,
like skill.
Well, yeah. I mean, I guess I was saying, like, you look at all the players who've ever played professional sports and how many of their kids have made it. Like the Mannings, Christian McCaffrey's dad, Ed McCaffrey, was a receiver for Denver with Elway. Patrick Mahomes, his dad was a pitcher. Like, there are definitely, there's definitely a decent amount, but I feel like it's definitely a minority of pro athletes' kids go on to make the pros. I guess that was my point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just think it's a killer move, man, to be like trained as a punter from that early on. Because a lot of punters just are like converted, whatever.
Sure, yeah.
One team. So it's like, it's interesting, I'm hyped for him. I think he could pull it off. Hard work.
Well, Cook
determination.
himself was, according to Wikipedia at least, he played linebacker and tight end in college, in high school. I mean,
Yeah, there you go.
before he walked on to Nebraska.
Well, I guess that wraps up the episode. Thanks so much for listening, everybody. We'll be back eventually with more stuff. It might actually be like finally a draft season. We're like a month away. I don't know.
I think so.
Is it time to start talking about the draft? Not just be.
I think it is.
Corner? All
I
right.
kind of don't want to because I have to confess that I haven't done terribly much research. Doing too much college basketball research for my bracket that's in flames over in the corner here, but hopefully my draft research will go better.
Yeah, there's a little less variance, I feel like, than March Madness. But yeah, I guess we'll start breaking down the draft. You can find us on Twitter at OneWinningPod. You can email us, onewinningpod@gmail.com. We'll be back in a week or two to discuss said draft, any other big news with the Ravens. And until then, enjoy yourselves, have fun with your loved ones and family, and we'll see you soon.